Okay, if you're listening to this, that means you wanted to hear me talk about the Flames, so I'll just get right into it. I've found that lately there's been a lot of discourse amongst the fan base on team building as it relates to the Flames. So before getting into my thoughts on team building, what I found doing some research, I think it might be valuable to discuss why there is such heated debate amongst Flames fans around this topic. Trying to mentally diagnose Flames fans is beyond complicated, but I'll give it a shot. I think there are three main reasons why people want to talk about this so much. Reason number one, preseason expectations. Coming into this season, fans were expecting this to be year one of the rebuild, and instead, in classic Flames fashion, they're in a playoff spot 49 games into the season, that's over half the season played. I think because of those preseason expectations, even the most optimistic Flames fans still aren't convinced this team will make the playoffs. The biggest reason being that the Flames are in this position largely because of a rookie goaltender that has given them unexpectedly good goaltending, and that feels like it'll be unsustainable to some fans. But aside from that, there's not anything really about this team that suggests it's a cup contender this year. I feel like I'm not going out too much of a limb there. In short, it just feels, even though it is past the halfway mark of the season, it still feels too early to call the Flames a legitimate playoff contender based off those preseason expectations. Reason number two was last year's promise of a new direction. So last year, the discourse preseason was we're either going to re-sign all of the pending UFAs or take a final kick at the can with the group of players or have to trade them all and rebuild. Largely, if not entirely, due to the start of the season the Flames had last season, they traded all of those players for future assets in what appeared to be year zero of the rebuild, the beginning, if you will. Reason number three, overall organizational philosophy for 20 plus years. This reason is not unique to this year, but it's always kind of just hanging around. It's been 35 years since the last time the Flames put up over 100 points in back-to-back seasons. The last time this franchise had a sustained multi-year run of competing for a cup consecutively. And honestly, as much as this fan base craves a championship, I would make the hot take that the fan base just craves a window of 4 to 5 years where they are competing for one, something we've never had since the literal 80s. Anyway, so that's why I think everyone and their dog, including myself, wants to chime in on this. But here's what I did. I went back and looked at every single NHL team to win a cup since Crosby's Penguins won a cup in 2009. That's 16 teams. On each of the 16 teams, I pulled the top 4 forwards, top 2 defensemen by average time on ice during their respective cup run, and the goalie for what I will refer to as that team's foundation. I then looked at how each team acquired those 7 players. That's a total of 112 players. And please note, Penguins have won 3 cups during this time, so Sidney Crosby technically counts as 3 players. But it's basically across 16 teams, so there could be some repeat players counting as the same guy counting as multiple players. Okay, why did I undertake this? As a Flames fan, I like to identify myself as team rebuild. Take that for however you want. Anyways, during the 23-24 season when I was advocating for a rebuild, I found the first stat among cup-winning teams since the 2009 Penguins that I thought was relevant and would make it clear to everybody that this team kind of needs to bottom out to get top-end talent. That was that 14 of the 16 cup-winning teams since 2009 had at least one player on their team that was drafted in the top 4 overall spots of the NHL draft. 8 of the 16 teams had at least 2 players. Now, I use that stat to tell people how important it is to draft at the top of the NHL draft. 2 teams have won a cup without having a foundational player drafted in the top 4, meaning 87.5% of cup teams had that very important, highly drafted player. I've been quoting that for over a year now, but today I wanted to go over some other really interesting things that I found. So that is research nugget number 1. I'll repeat it again. 14 out of 16 teams had at least one player drafted in the top 4, one player that they drafted in the top 4 of the NHL draft. 8 of those 16 teams had 2 or more such players that, again, were drafted within the first 4 overall spots of the NHL draft. Nugget number 2, only 2 cup winners had 3 or more top 4 drafted players in their foundation, which was a bit of a surprise to me and something I wanted to share. So most of the teams had exclusively had 1 or 2. Very few had 0, and only 2 such teams had 3 or more players that were drafted at the very top of the NHL draft. And what that indicates to me is that while, yes, bottoming out and drafting high is an almost necessary ingredient to building a Stanley Cup champion, the length of time in which a team spends in the NHL's dumpster was shorter than I expected. From my research, I would even go as far to say that if an NHL team can't get out of the basement of the league after 2 years of bottoming out, they might never get their shit together. That's because while drafting star players in the top 4 spots of the NHL draft is incredibly important, it's not the only ingredient. And while a team is bottoming out, there's nothing stopping a team from acquiring the other necessary ingredients to build a cup-winning foundation. What are those ingredients? Well, let's move on to my third nugget. Nugget number 3 was that 13 out of 16 cup-winning teams since 2009 had at least one foundational piece that they drafted in round 2 through 7, and 9 out of 16 had 2 such players. So to me, this indicates that while absolutely nailing your top 4 overall picks are crucial, just as important is to find those hidden gems in the mid and late rounds of the NHL draft. So please note that this is not an or proposition. I'm not saying that NHL teams can choose one of drafting top 4 superstars or finding hidden gems in the draft. I think if you want a championship caliber NHL organization, your amateur scouting staff needs to both draft superstar. They need to hit on those top 4 picks and draft superstars and find hidden gems in the draft. You need to be able to do both. Doing just one of those things makes it difficult for you. Most teams were able to do both of those things. Nugget number 4, 11 out of the 16 teams acquired at least one player via trade in what I would describe as a clear trade win. 6 of the 16 teams acquired two or more players via trade wins. I think this one is pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, if you come out ahead on trades, that's going to lead to your team being successful. But I was surprised at how many foundational players were acquired via trade. In fact, looking at the 112 foundational players over the 16 seasons, 26% of them were acquired via trade, which illustrates the point further. Nugget number 5, 12 out of 16 teams acquired at least one foundational piece during free agency. Only 3 of the 16 acquired 2 or more foundational pieces in free agency. And a decent amount of these players weren't even that big name free agents that one might think of. Only 7 of the 16 teams had at least one foundational piece UFA signing that was worth more than 7% of the cap in the year the team won the cup. And only 1 team had multiple foundational players acquired via free agency, taking up over 7% of the cap. There's also a bit of a time skew with teams and free agents. 2009 to 2015, it was a little more common for foundational players to be acquired via free agency, and it's become a little less common from 2016 to 2024. Nugget number 6, when finding the average age of those 7 foundational players for each cup winner, 15 of the 16 teams had an average age between 27 and 30, suggesting that is the age window when you're players of that age for winning a cup. What does this all mean for the Flames? I think it's most logical to start in the present and then move to the future. Using the exercise I used for all of the cup winners, the Flames' current foundation of players that they're using this season are Jonathan Huberdeau, Nazem Kadri, Michael Backlund, Blake Coleman, Mackenzie Weegar, Rasmus Anderson, and Dustin Wolf. Of those, 2 players were acquired via trade. 2 players were acquired via free agency, one of which has a cap hit of more than 7% of the current salary cap. And the remaining 3 players were acquired via the draft, 2 of which were selected in round 2 or later. And then the average age of those players is 30.86 years old, which is helped a lot by Wolf being 24. That drags that average down quite a bit. If it weren't for Wolf, it'd be much higher. I don't think I'm breaking any news here when I say this, but the current Flames Foundation doesn't really fit the model of a cup-winning core of players. No one was acquired in the top 4 of the draft. The 2 players they did acquire via trade, I would not consider to be acquired via trade win, given that the player both of them were traded for was a foundational player for Florida's cup win just last year. And they appear to be past their age window to win a cup. I don't want to belabor this point too much. Those are still 7 very good players, and it's not their fault they're being asked to be more than just a good player and instead being asked to be a foundational piece for this version of the Calgary Flames. But if you are the opinion like myself that this current iteration of the Flames team is not a cup contender and that the true window to be a cup contender is in the future, well, then let's maybe talk a little bit about the future. If everything goes right and you're an extremely optimistic person, I think you could make the argument that the Flames have as many as 4 players that will make up their foundation for when they are ready to compete for a Stanley Cup, as in they already have those 4 players, 4 of the 7. I'm not saying all 4 of those guys will be part of the Flames foundation when they are competing for a cup. I'm just saying that for each one of those 4 guys, if you dream a little, it might be possible. I'll go from most likely to hit this necessary ceiling to least likely. Number 1 would be Dustin Wolf. Partway through this first NHL season, Dustin Wolf, at the bare minimum, has proven he is an NHL goalie. It's really just a matter now of proving how good of an NHL goalie he will be. He currently is 9th in the league in goals saved above expected, indicating to me that it's completely reasonable to suggest that if he hits his ceiling, he could be a cup-winning goalie. The second player I would say is Connor Zary. Through his first 100 NHL games, Connor Zary is producing at over 0.5 points per game. If you would have made me do this exercise last year, I probably would not have included Zary on this list as far as becoming a future foundational piece. But what's changed since then hasn't been Zary's production, but the fact that this season he's been moved to center, has continued to produce offense at the same clip before he got hurt. And this is with less than spectacular line mates, not bad players, but by no means elite players. And to me, all this indicates that I think Zary has the ceiling to be a 2C on a cup-winning team. Again, if everything works out and he hits a ceiling, which is an if. The number 3 player, I would say, is Zane Parekh. Zane hasn't even played a single NHL game yet and wasn't even drafted all that high at 9. And so him coming in at 3 on this list should tell you everything you really need to know about the top-end talent that exists in the Flames organization. But with that being said, Zane is still producing at an even higher clip than he did last year in his insane draft season that got him drafted so high. And that is why hockey prospect nerds are extremely bullish on his NHL future to be a potential star in the NHL. That's why it's okay to say that he has that ceiling. Again, it's not the expectation. We're dealing with ceilings here. And the last player, this might be a bit of a surprise to some people listening to this, but I would make the argument that if he absolutely hits the ceiling, Kevin Ball could be a future foundational piece. Again, this time last year, he was a 3rd-pair defenseman on New Jersey. But I think a lot of people forget that Ball is still only 24 years old. And for a defenseman, that's relatively young. It's only 1 year older than Zary. And this season, he's proven he can handle top 4 minutes when he's played with Rasmus Andersson. But more importantly, the reason I include him on this list is because when you look at other cup-winning teams and who their second best defenseman was, I think to be included in this list, Kevin Ball would have to be the second best defenseman on a cup-winning team. There's guys like Rob Scuderi, Dennis Seidenberg, Willie Mitchell, Trevor Daley, Ron Hainsey, Brian Dumoulin, Matt Niskanen, and Ryan McDonough. Now, I don't know if he's going to be better than – I don't think he'll be better than all those guys, but I think he definitely, if he hits his ceiling, can be included in that list of players. Like he wouldn't stand out if included among that list of players if he hits a ceiling, especially if he's playing with a version of Zane Parekh that turns into a superstar. Again, we're dealing with hypotheticals, ifs, and ceilings. I'm not saying this is all going to happen, but I just think these 4 players, based on their age, what they've shown thus far, have the potential to be a future foundational piece. The problem with the Flames is that despite potentially having these 4 guys to build around, these might be the 4 easiest foundational pieces to find of the 7 that you need. Even if I hope and pray and daydream about what the younger members of the Flames organization might become, I don't think they have a future first line forward in the organization right now that is a future first line forward on a cup winning team. I mean, as big as I am the biggest Connor Zary fan that exists, like he's my guy. I fully believe in him and his ceiling, but I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that I don't think it's fair to put those high of expectations on him that he can be a top line forward in this league for a cup winning team, even if his absolute ceiling hits. That even for me, the biggest Connor Zary fan that exists, that is too far of a bridge to say, at least right now. I mean, I'd love, prove me wrong, please do. Nothing would make me happier than be wrong about that. Anyways, that will be the challenge for Flames management, is how do you get those 3 more foundational forwards without drafting in the top 4? The Flames will not be drafting in the top 4 of the NHL draft this year, and I think I'm starting to have some serious doubts if they ever will. That's a loaded question that we can maybe talk about another time. The whole point being that I'm not taking future top 4 picks. I'm not going to take it for granted that the Flames will draft in the top 4 of the NHL draft in the near future. They might. I'm just not going to definitively say that they definitely will. It's far from a guarantee. So I'm kind of operating under the assumption that they won't. If they do within the next 2-3 years, then they better hit on those players. But it just doesn't seem like something that should be taken for granted. Anyways, as I talked about, not having that top 4 pick is going to make it very difficult to assemble a foundation of players to build around to go compete for and win Stanley Cups. I assume that's the Flames' goal, is to be there and to compete for Stanley Cups. So if they want to do that without drafting in the top 4, then they really have to win some trades, and their amateur scouting staff is really going to have to find some hidden diamonds, hidden gems in the rough. Again, that's winning a Stanley Cup without a player that you yourself drafted in the top 4 of the NHL draft and become a foundational piece on your team. Only 2 teams have done it in the last 16 years. The Flames, I think, have done a lot of. I think you can make the argument the Flames have done a lot of really good things in finding the ingredients to build a cup-winning team. They've hit on draft picks in rounds 2 through 7. They've made some savvy trades, but it all kind of feels like they're building a team with one hand behind their back without a top 4 pick. And I'm not sitting here advocating that they need to go out and try and lose. It's just kind of the constant dilemma that this organization is in. And I guess we'll see what happens. But anyways, I just wanted to share the research that I did for this. I made a bunch of charts and graphs. So if you want those, let me know and I'll send them over to you. If you want all the data that I used to do this research, I'm happy to share it, discuss it. And if you want me to keep doing videos and stuff like this, let me know.